Thank you for joining us on the Winning at Selling podcast. I'm Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems, and with me is Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute.
As the adage goes, the separation is in the preparation. Add another famous quote like, professionals don't practice on prospects. Throw in a sports analogy, and I think you will uncover the theme of today's show. So get dressed as Bill and I welcome speaker, author, and sportscaster Joe Schmit to discuss how sports professionals practice on episode 600 of the Winning at Selling podcast.
You asked him to get dressed, Scott. Are you assuming that a lot of our listeners listen to the show?
Getting dressed for the field, for the court, for the, whatever you're
suit
on.
Up.
Get dressed. Are you going to suit up or not? I should have
there
said
you go.
suit
Okay.
up.
I wondered what you thought our listeners did usually if they were listening sans clothes. So
it's open to interpretation.
Okay. All right. A lot of what we say is open to interpretation. Well,
they know what I meant.
Yeah. Don't listen to what I say. Listen to what I mean.
Right.
So what I do mean today is we have no book club, but next week we're going to be back in The Go-Giver by Bob Berg and John David Mann. We'll do chapters 10 and 11, which is the fourth stratospheric law of success. So but without getting into that too much, we'll enjoy going back to that. But Scott, take it away with our guest.
Our guest today is a man who has had a front row seat in some of the greatest sports events in history. He has interviewed the biggest names, covered the biggest events, and turned in some of the biggest expense reports in TV history. He has won 19 Emmys and is in the Speaker Hall of Fame for Minnesota. He has written 2 books, Silent Impact and The Impact Blueprint. So brace yourself for impact. Joe, welcome to the show, Winning at Selling podcast.
It's great to be on, Scott, and Bill, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. This is going to be exciting.
This is perfect timing, considering Joe Mauer just got into the Hall of Fame. This is the first interview that you've done after the announcement, Joe. Is that safe to say?
That would be very true.
Oh, history, a milestone here. Joe Schmit is on the Winning at Selling podcast, the first interview after Joe Mauer gets into the Hall of Fame. Bill, and I know you're a big sports fan and you love the Twins. What is your favorite memory of Joe Mauer?
Well, I guess it's the one you keep seeing over and over again when he was playing in Baltimore and the pitcher missed him entirely. The ball bounced off the backstop and he caught it backhanded without looking.
Wow.
It's quite a little newsreel, but I just remember I love somebody who can hit, doesn't have to hit 1,000 home runs, hits for average. I was a big Rod Carew fan and I think the home run is overrated.
Joe,
anyway, Joe, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's good to be here, and it's good to be on the day after Joe Mauer made the Baseball Hall of Fame. I have to admit, I got a little emotional myself when the announcement was made. I covered Joe since he was a junior in high school when we were like, who's this Mauer kid from St. Paul? And then to kind of see him, go through all this, his entire career, and then all of a sudden have it, have him go in the Hall of Fame. It was a really nice thing. And I'm going to be in Cooperstown this July, and it's going to be a great time.
It's a unique thing to have somebody not only play their whole career with one team, but be in the home team where they grew up. What a great story that is.
It really is, especially in the day and age of free agency, and there's not a lot of loyalty between the teams and the players these days because it's all about money. And, Joe showed the loyalty to the Twins, and the Twins showed the loyalty back to him. And, when you think about it, when the Twins drafted Joe Mauer, there were a couple of other players who were college players. Mark Pryor was the best college pitcher scouts had ever seen. And the Twins decided to take Joe Mauer, the local kid. And I can remember vividly, they got ripped for that decision. And Terry Ryan just sat back. He was a general manager at the time. And he said, this kid's got the makeup. This kid has the talent. He's a 3-sport athlete. He has his blood, the blood that runs through his veins is cold, because he doesn't get riled. And, at 20 years old, he's a starting catcher in the major leagues.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Joe, I did not mention your third book just released that you wrote with Joe Mauer. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when I speak all over the place. One of the stories I tell is the impact that Joe Mauer had when he was in high school, because Joe's not only a Hall of Fame player, he's a Hall of Fame guy. And when he was in high school 22 years ago at Cretin-Derham Hall High School, he walked a young student who was blind to the lunchroom every day. And this was a young man by the name of Mike Hawley who sat alone for lunch until Joe invited him to sit down at his table. Now, you got to imagine that was a cool table because Joe was the big man on campus. Well, the impact that that had is a story that I tell. And I decided, after talking to my publisher, to write a children's book. And we called it The Right Thing to Do, because when I asked Joe 20 years after he did this kind act, I said, "Why did you do it?" And Joe's answer was pretty simple. He said, "Because it was the right thing to do." So the book magically came out on Friday, and on Tuesday, Joe's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. And not surprisingly, we were #1 on Amazon in children's books for several days. So that was very exciting.
That is great. Yeah, it's exciting to meet people whose actions behind the scene match what they say the kind of person they are. And it's not a fake action. We see so much in social media now of people faking what they are, and to have somebody authentic like Joe Mauer and to get to know him personally as you have must be very gratifying.
He is so humble. So when I was approached about, my publisher said you should write a children's book. And when I talked to Joe about it, I wanted Joe to co-author with me. And Joe said, no, I'll get behind the project because 100% of the proceeds to this book, 100%, I got sponsors to pay for everything, are going to two charities, Joe's favorite charity and a charity that started because of the inspiration they got reading my book, Silent Impact, and the Joe Mauer story specifically. So Joe did not want to be the author. He said, "I'll write a foreword. I will back it." And I sat there and I thought, why doesn't he want to be the co-author? And then I realized Joe looks like a really good guy in this book, and Joe didn't want it to look like it was coming from him. The fact that we were able to donate all the money to charity, and the fact that we also have an opportunity to donate, we are donating books to over 500 elementary schools because of people donating money to pay it forward, to tell this story to Joe Mauer. And we continue to get donations at joemauerbook.com, and people continue to buy the books there. So look at the win-win-win we have out of this. And this story happened 22 years ago, and it's still having an impact today.
Well, Joe, we could talk about baseball all day. For me, if you look behind me, as you can see me, I have every bobblehead except about 2 or 3 of them. So I'm a big Twins fan. So I don't want to belabor our audience with that. But one of the things that has struck me, and we've had some authors that have talked about this for salespeople, is the ability to practice. And I know Joe was a big practicer because my kids got the Joe Mauer swing trainer, right? And
quick swing.
The quick swing. That's right.
Yep.
And I can't emphasize enough for sales professionals that they shouldn't be practicing on their prospects. They should be practicing more. How do professionals practice? And I think baseball players, because they have the game every day, then they have a little bit of time for practice, is a better analogy than the football, where they have the whole week to prepare for one game. So what have you seen in business, how practice in professional baseball or other sports can transfer?
Well, let me start that off with a quick question, a quick story about another Cretin-Derham Hall of Fame baseball player, Paul Molitor. I happened to be in Kansas City the night that Paul Molitor got his 3,000th hit. We were covering it. It was a big deal, and he was playing for the Twins at that time. Played a lot of years for the Brewers, obviously. The next night, we got to the ballpark early because we had some technical problems with our satellite truck, and we wanted to make sure that we would get on the air. Well, who shows up at the ballpark early but Paul Molitor, a guy who the night before became the 23rd player in Major League Baseball to get 3,000 hits. He was on the cover of every single sports section in the country that day. And I said, "Molly, what are you doing here so early?" He goes, "Oh, I'm here for early batting practice. I don't like the way I'm swinging right now." Early batting practice is for the subs and the rookies and the people who don't play. Here's a guy who made Major League history the night before, back grinding and working just as hard as he did before he got that 3,000th hit. And my line is there any doubt in your mind how we got the 3,000 hits? Because
Right.
it was the practice, it was making sure perfection it was happening in his practice. And then I talk about impact. And I said, what kind of impact do you think it had on those rookies and those guys trying to make the lineup to see this guy grinding again? And I think a great term is grinding, because the athletes that I see that who are successful enjoy the grind. It's a little bit like sales, right? If you don't grind, if you don't do the small little details, if you don't follow up, you're not going to make that sale. Just the same thing in athletes, for athletics. You have to be able to push yourself and do the little things that turn out to be the big things.
So the great ones never take it for granted. They're always continuing to get better.
Yeah, I always say that, when I studied, I've had, in my career, fortunate enough to interview huge names, Muhammad Ali, Tiger Woods, Suni Lee, the local gymnast. And I've tried to figure out what makes them all tick. And I really figured out it wasn't only the passion to be the best, but it was the passion to prepare to be the best. They did not want to compete against somebody that they could beat. That's too easy. They wanted to compete against somebody who would push them. How can they take their game to the next level? And I think that people are motivated, athletes tend to be motivated by a couple of things. And one of them is fear of failure. And, maybe that's ego. Yeah. But at the same time, if they're fearful of failure, they're going to do the work.
So they're using that as an internal motivator to drive them all the time.
Yeah, I've seen it happen a lot. And I've also seen that, the great athletes are the ones who are the first at practice and the last to leave. But they're doing it with a purpose. They're not just out there so they can, there are some people who, do it for show. I think of Chris Carter of the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings had this hill out at Winter Park. And after every practice, here's Carter, the guy was perennial All-Pro. He's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He would run up and down that hill, and he would drag everybody with him. And when you look at great teams, and I think this kind of works in the corporate setting too, or the business setting too, when your best player or your best salesman is your hardest worker, they drag a lot of people along with them. And I think that happens like I said, in the corporate culture, and it certainly happens in the sports culture.
I think I saw an interview with Chris Carter once where he was talking about the jugs machine. And he said that really helped his game because he said, when you see me make that one-handed catch, dragging both toes in the end zone, he said, I've done that 100 times every day. That wasn't the first time I did that spectacular catch. I had that ball thrown there 100 times every practice to the right and 100 times to the left. Is that something that you see, that the great ones pick something and just work on it so they can be spectacular?
I saw it. It's interesting when I speak, I always tell people, you go to a conference, a 3-day conference, and I will always say, consider this your off season. Because when you're working 365 days a year, or you're working,
right,
we don't take an off season. Pro athletes take an off season. And what do they do in their off season? They work on their game. They work on their weakness. They work on something that's going to take their game to the next level. So I challenge people who go to a conference, now is the time to work on your game. This is your off season. What are you going to do? How are you going to open your mind? How are you going to get uncomfortable? Because that's the only way you're going to grow. And because some people go to conferences and they go and they want to eat well and they want to meet friends and whatever. But the smart ones go there and say, what can I learn? What can I change my mind on? What can I look at a little bit differently and maybe break some new ground?
It seems like in sports athletes and in sales professionals, the beliefs and kind of the mental conceptual barriers really hold people back on implementing what they know they've learned, the skills that they have. Is there anything that you've learned from a professional athlete on their belief systems that really support the behavior of getting the results that they want?
Well, I can go to one of my favorite quotations, John Wooden. He says it's what you learn after you know it all that really counts.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think that the athletes who do take their game to the next level are always constantly trying to learn, always trying to, raise their game to the next level. I think of Adam Thielen, who played for the Vikings, and he was an undrafted rookie free agent who made the team on special teams, ended up being a Pro Bowler, and is having a very, very good career in the NFL. And when I would listen to what he would do to keep his body, which was his temple, which was what kept him in play, from the massages to the diet to he had these machines he would strap on, just all the things he would do to make his body prepared to play on Sunday. It was pretty incredible.
It's not just the practice, it's looking at your life as a holistic thing, the learning, the preparation, and I think also, Joe, not becoming satisfied. I think a lot of people fall down, whether it's in sales or anywhere in business or their career, because they were pretty good and they got satisfied with that. What can people do to continue to maintain an impact and not let the satisfaction of whatever level they're at hold them back?
Well, I always say if you're comfortable, you're not pushing yourself hard enough. I'm reading a book right now, I'm almost done with it, called The Comfort Crisis. And what it does is it kind of breaks down that if you're too comfortable, you're kind of mailing it in. And the only way to break new ground is to get uncomfortable. Every time you try something new, there's a chance you're going to make a mistake. But every time you make a mistake, you can learn something from that mistake. One of the little exercises I do when I speak is I have people fold their hands, just like well, it's hard to explain on the podcast, but you fold your hands and then you put your top thumb on bottom and your bottom thumb on top. And that little move right there is just a little uncomfortable. Well, that's a metaphor for change. I think too many people, as they get maybe a little bit later in their career, they get too comfortable and they're fearful rather than fearless. And what are you going to do to be fearless? And I think we all need to challenge ourselves to do something new, to try something new, and to just go that extra mile, that 1%.
One thing that I'm always curious and interested in is during the halftime of a football game, and we've seen it in a Super Bowl game where a team is down 14-0. They have a halftime, they go into the locker rooms, they come out, and the one that is behind ends up winning the game. When it comes to that locker room talk, a lot of our listeners are sales managers or they own companies and they lead a sales team. So thinking an analogy of a sports coach talking to a team that has the ability to win, but for one reason or another is behind in the game, what are some of the things that you've heard in the locker rooms that really turn the player around from the coach on winning the game?
Well, I can always tell who's a good coach by the adjustments they make at halftime. And it's a communication game. It's not a football game. And, it's not a basketball game. It's a communication game. I can always tell when a team is locked in, because what happens is the coach will do an interview on Monday or Tuesday, and then we'll interview the players on Wednesday or Thursday. And whenever I hear the players repeat what the coach said, I said, it's going in, it's digging in. And a lot of times it's a phrase. A lot of times it's a mantra that they have going that week that they're going to concentrate on. And those are the coaches who, win. And those are the leaders who get their team to follow them. So it is a art of communication that they have to hit. And the great ones, they're the great communicators who are able to do it. I remember before Bud Grant died, and I hope you don't mind me dropping names here, but I know because I got the sports background, Oprah told me I had to quit dropping names. So so before Bud died, I was talking to Bud about leadership. And I said, Bud, what was your key to leadership? And Bud said, well, first of all, you got to get to know your people and what makes them tick. He goes, I knew I could not yell at Fran Tarkington in front of the team. If I wanted to talk to Fran in a constructive criticism way, we did it behind closed doors. Chuck Foreman, And Carl Eller and some of those guys, I had to yell at them in front of the other people because I knew that would push them, that would motivate them. And I thought to myself, it's the same thing in business. If you are a leader, you better get to know your people to figure out what makes them tick.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the motivation might be fear. Sometimes the motivation might be you just have to keep patting them on the back until they get it together. And I thought that was pretty profound, the way that he coached. And when you think about Bud was almost more of a psychologist than he was a football coach many times.
Right.
Well, you've mentioned John Wooden, and I think that's the same sort of thing. You don't have to be a yeller to be a great motivator and a great coach. You just have to tie into the needs of the people that you're working with and find out what they want and help them get it.
Well, Bill, if I could go off on that, because I think about this, I used to have both Tony Dungy as a regular on a show. I had Sports Rep on Sunday night, and I had Brian Billick as a regular on my show. Both went on to coach teams, and both went on to win Super Bowls.
Mm-hmm.
They could not be further apart from coaching. Billick couldn't order a hot dog without whipping an Effenheimer in there. Tony Dungy was cool, calm, and collect. There could be a hurricane going on, and Tony's blood pressure would still be at 60. He was just a calm, cool guy. They both won Super Bowls, and I tried to figure out why did they win Super Bowls. And I think I'm pretty sure that I figured it out. It's because they made sure everybody on the team was crystal clear on what their role was, how important that role was, and how it's going to help the team. And if you did your role and helped the team, that you had no worries about, keeping your job. And they both had different styles, but they both had that clarity. And clarity tends to be the catalyst for growth.
Yeah, I read a good book, and I can't remember who wrote it. He was a coach, I think, of the Falcons. You win in the locker room first. And he talks about culture, right? And what is it? Culture eats something for breakfast. What is it, Scott?
Culture eats strategy for lunch.
Yeah. And so what have you seen, and what can leaders do to create a culture that will allow and encourage everyone on the team to be their best?
Well, when I give my culture first mindset presentation, I break it down into 3 areas: compassion, connection, and clarity. Compassion. In today's day and age, you have to get to know your people, and you have to like your people, and they have to like you back, or at least have the opportunity to do that. They need to feel that they belong. Right now, I think when you have an employee who is unproductive and unsuccessful, they don't feel they belong. The second thing is connections. What are you doing to connect with your people? And what are you doing in your environment to make sure people can connect with each other? And then the last area is clarity, which we just kind of talked about. Everybody needs to know their role and why their role is important. And along the way, that leader has to realize that positive reinforcement is the essence of great leadership today. And that all the stats, and I'm not a big stat guy because I think some of those stats are made up, but the one that I like is 60% of employees today, according to ADP, said they would work harder if they received praise.
Wow.
So you just, I don't think too many times a boss waits until the sale's done to pat someone on the back. Reward progress. Let them know you care. Check up on them. And we all get so busy. And one of the things that I suggest is literally, before your calendar gets filled, put 15 minutes a day or 15 minutes 3 times a week to check up on people.
Yeah.
That's your impact time, your compassion time, and find out how they're doing their project, but find out how their kid did in the hockey tournament this weekend. Oh, you lost to Thunder Bay. My kid lost to Thunder Bay too. You know what I mean? Just get to know them on a personal level, and that will help you. That will help you make that Bud Grant connection we talked about.
Dale Carnegie wrote the book How to Win Friends and Influence People over 100 years ago. And one of the things he said in that was people aren't given enough motivation to tell by people telling them they're okay. Exactly what you're quoting today. And we think everybody changes so much, don't we? But the same human values, care about me, like me, be interested in me, They keep coming back all the time, whether we have social media and a phone in our hand all the time or not.
Well, when I work with companies, one of the things we try to do is to come up with a mantra, a feeling for the culture you want within your organization. Now, everybody will have, the core values, 6 or 7 core values. And I always tell, I always tell the CEO sometimes get mad, but I'll kind of say, if I quizzed all your employees without looking, how many of them would know all 7 core values?
Right.
Oh, they all would. And I said, let me do it. No, no, no.
Ask the CEO, they never know.
Yeah, exactly. It's up on some billboard somewhere. But I said, so what's the feeling you want? And we'll work on that. So some of the things that have come up in conversations have been, that with working on these mantras have been like, we're here to help you flourish. So flourish became the word. It's memorable, it's repeatable. And if everybody feels that, that's the feeling you want when people walk into the office. Another one was belong, belong, belong. I talked about that a little bit earlier. If you look at people who are lonely today and some of the mental health issues we have going on, those things happen in the workplace too.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not concerned about that, if you're not making people feel they belong, you could have a lonely employee who's not going to be very productive.
Mm-hmm.
We did research on people. The question I ask is if there were a going away party, who would the most people show up for? And that person, as you might expect, would be somebody who's a great team player. They're, always going the extra mile, those kinds of things. We asked the opposite question: who would the least amount of people show up for? And when we found out that that person was not a good team player, they were not very productive, they didn't get along with a lot of people, then we peeled back the onion a little bit and said, why? Somebody hired this person because they thought they'd be successful. Wow. And when we looked at it, many times that person was not successful because the job was too big for them. And that put them into this shell. And if you're a leader and a manager, how can you lift them up? How can you give them the resources to maybe save them? Now, you might not be able to save all of them, but if that person feels that they're getting some help and they're supported, you might, save an employee. Yeah. And as we all know, recruiting and retention today costs you a lot of money.
Yeah,
it really does.
Well, we have too many sales managers, getting back to our audience, whose sales training program is "Go Get 'em, Tiger."
Yeah.
and we're certainly think that there's more value in giving people good tools. I really like your mantra. I when I talk with companies, I want them to have whatever their values are. When I make a difficult decision, I have to use that value lens to look through. I can't ask everybody if I should give this customer a present or a break or whatever. I have to look through the values and say, I can make this decision myself because it matches the values. And I think too many companies, they have this list of 7 things, and one of them is treat the customer right. And then I go and treat the customer what I think is right, and I get yelled at because I gave them too much. And it's like, well, I looked at it through this lens and I made the best decision I could, and that's not supported. So you're absolutely right. We do some things to shoot ourselves in the foot as far as culture is concerned, because we don't want to do what we really say we want to do.
Yeah. And there are still too many old school gotcha bosses out there just waiting for you to make a mistake and gotcha, and that doesn't work anymore. That simply does not work anymore.
People have too many options.
Yeah. And on top of it, I think that employees today, especially the younger generations, I say, yeah, that is plural. They want something that's bigger than just a paycheck every 2 weeks. They want to work for the greater good. They want to work for Bomba socks because they give a pair of socks for every socks that, for every pair of socks they sell. They want to work for organizations who care about the community they serve, and not just in a kind of a PR kind of way. And I think the most successful companies figure out ways to do that.
And the biggest challenge, I think, in that, I love that idea of working for a greater good, Joe. It seems like some of the younger generations these days, they don't put off delayed gratification. They have to feel an immediate reward. Are they really willing to do the work and commit to it without seeing the results right away. And that seems to be kind of the challenge that I hear with some cultures, is that younger generations just don't have the commitment to go to work. They want to work for greater good, but they don't commit. Have you experienced that? Or
Well, you hear that, and when I hear that, I kind of cringe, because that makes you sound like back in my day talk.
Right, exactly.
Back in my day talk doesn't work.
Right. That's why I'm bringing it up. It doesn't work, Joe. So.
No, there's 7 different generations in the workplace,
Yeah.
and they all want to be, no matter what generation they're in, they all want to be acknowledged and feel valued. So I think as a leader, you have to make these people feel valued, so they do kind of push themselves. I think the generational thing, if you say that, don't ever say that in public.
Right. Well, I'm bringing it up because I think some people that are listening are struggling with that, and they may be the salesperson, or they may be the sales leader or the sales manager on that. So I just want to throw it out there as a topic that should be talked about, should be acknowledged, and I think leadership needs to adjust and adapt accordingly.
We are the reason that happens, by the way, the older generation, because we sent our kid to an 8-team tournament. They finished in 8th place and got a big trophy for it. So we were the ones who did that.
Yeah.
Well, we went overboard on the affirming. We affirmed when they did a bad job and said, you did a great job, even though they did a bad job. I think we need to make sure that we understand wearing the ribbon with the right color isn't enough. Doing something about it is if you really care about an issue, saying you care is of no value. Doing some actions that will improve the situation is where the value is. And we've allowed too many people to say, oh, look at how virtuous I am because I wear the ribbon, but I won't change my behavior to do something about the problem. And so young people who believe in this, what's the Simon Sinek book, begins with the why. I think they also have to say, I can do something about the why. I can make things better.
And I think the older generation also just has to realize that, things are different. But when we were younger, they were different for us, and we're all kind of based on our past experiences. So how we grew up, the things that happened, the kids that grew up today, depending on the age, they were either 9/11 kids. Now there might be COVID kids. They might be the things that they went through in life do shape how they work, how they act, what makes them tick and what makes them cringe.
Well, Joe, we are unfortunately running out of time. It's just whipped by here with this great conversation, sports and motivation and leadership and sales. And I think we've gone far and wide here, but thank you so much for being part of the show. Any final words that you want to leave with people?
I think we all need to raise our game to the next level. We all need to be more aware and intentional with the impact we have on each other. And I think if you want to be happier and healthier and more productive, the more good you do, the more good that comes back to you. And don't be afraid to take the time to reach out. Don't be afraid to ask one more question. If you're talking about the weather, you're not going deep enough, and just so you can really find out what people are up to and what they're all about. You might find out that we're all more alike than we are different.
So we'll have a link to the book on Amazon so people can buy the book, support the charity. I think it's a great cause. We'll have a link to Joe Schmit's website. And then, Joe, you've got an online class, a culture assessment. Is that what are you offering online there?
Yeah, I've got an online class off of my website. It's a culture first class, and it's there for people who want to. They're all very short lessons. I decided not to do a 1 hour. 8 1-hour lessons. I have about 8 15-minute lessons, and it's available online if you're interested. And I'd much rather do it in person.
Right.
But it's there for people who want it in small doses, or want to. Actually, some colleges have picked it up, which is kind of fun.
So you work with corporations on culture and impact, right?
Yeah, I have 2 main keynotes: culture first mindset and impact leadership. And there's a lot of crossover between the 2, but it depends on what direction they want to go.
And they can find out more by going to your website, which we'll link.
That would do it.
Excellent.
I'm grateful to have known Joe for 10 years. We're both members of the National Speakers Association. I'm really grateful that he celebrated our 600th episode with our listeners today, Joe. So thanks for being with us.
I'm number 600. All right.
We got good at it before we brought on the experts.
Right, exactly.
All right, we're going to close with our golden nugget. This is from Robin Sharma. Small daily improvements over time lead to stunning results.
Very true. It just reminds me of the adult learning model, which is incremental growth reinforced over time, gives us the results that we want. But so small daily habits that really make a big difference, Bill. So great quote.
Some people might say, go out and get better one skill at a time.
That's
Some
true.
People might
I've
say
heard
that
saying too.
I've heard that before.
Everything that we talked about will be at winningatselling.com. Again, episode 600.
And next week, our book club is The Go Giver. We're in chapters 10 and 11, and our topic is work habits of top salespeople. Exactly. Please subscribe, share the podcast with your colleagues and on your social media. Go out and get better, one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.